This morning, we find ourselves back into the Gospel of Mark, where we are introduced to the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "Be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Let us pray. Lord, open our hearts, our minds, our bodies, our souls, so that we may hear your truth and be healed by it. Amen. Please be seated. So life is a buttermilk biscuit, they say, or at least Rob and I have been saying for the past couple weeks. And I just have to say, I've loved being able to work here this week. I love it every week, but it's especially perfect because part of my job was to research biscuits. Like, how many people can say you do that for your job? You research biscuits. And I actually found some really interesting things about biscuits that I want to share with you. So the thing that caught me most by surprise is actually that buttermilk biscuits for a really long time were considered a delicacy. You know, it's no secret that buttermilk biscuits started in the South. They actually were created and were in full-fledged existence before the Civil War. So they've been around in the South for a long time. But they were treated as a delicacy. You would only really have them on Sundays, maybe for Sunday lunch or Sunday dinner. And part of the reason, the reason why that is it all comes down to the kind of wheat that was used to make the flour that then was used to make the biscuits. So in the rest of the country, so up north and out west, where the weather isn't as temperate and as warm during the winter, the growing season is shorter, they use summer wheat to grow, which has a lot more protein in it. So that means when you make it into a flour, it doesn't rise as much. But in the South, with our wonderful, longer growing season, we grew winter wheat, which has far less protein in it. So when you grind it up into a flour, it enables whatever you use that flour for to elevate and raise up, and it can get nice and flaky and fluffy. And part of the reason why that particular flour was, even in the South, even though it was abundant, was still considered a delicacy, was because you still had to import it and move it around, and you had the other ingredients to buy. But the buttermilk biscuit came into existence and was a delicacy in the South because we actually had the flour to make it. And it wasn't really until the 1960s into the 1970s that buttermilk biscuits took the country by storm. And we can thank Colonel Sanders for that. Because KFC was the first public restaurant chain to actually serve buttermilk biscuits. I think what kind of launched it for them is they opened a franchise in Utah, of all places, and now we just have buttermilk biscuits everywhere. You can go up to New York, you can go to Seattle, you can go to Texas, right here in the heart of Virginia. You can find buttermilk biscuits wherever you go, and we can enjoy the love and joy that comes from them. Great. And so that was in my mind as I was looking at this gospel passage. And what struck me is it's very hard for me, and I think for a lot of us, to think of a time when you couldn't go around the country and find buttermilk biscuits everywhere. And I think the same thing is true with the message of Jesus and the love of Jesus. For those of us in this country and around the world, we can go anywhere, and even if people don't believe it, if they don't understand it, they've heard of Jesus. They've heard something of his loving message of God's love and presence in the world. And it's hard to imagine a time when that wasn't. But our gospel passage is a prime example of that happening. During Jesus' lifetime, he wasn't some big celebrity, maybe in Israel, but outside of the tribes of Israel, no one really knew him. He was just this random Jewish guy going around preaching everything. And so that's the reason why, we see him hopping over to Tyre, which is this Gentile Greek area. He's going on sabbatical. He's going on vacation for a couple days. He's tired. He's done his healing and his feeding, and he's like, I need a break. So he runs off to this place where nobody is supposed to know him. It'd be like me trying to hop over to Kentucky. No one knows me over there. And yet, somehow, some way, there's this woman, and she's a Gentile. She's a Syrophoenician origin, Syrophoenician woman. And she has heard about Jesus. She's heard that he's in Tyre, and she's already heard the abundant love that he's been proclaiming in Israel. She's already heard of the healing that happens. There's something about this message that rings true to what she's experienced of God in her life. And so she runs to him. She has to see him. And so before we continue there, I want to offer a note here. And if any of y'all saw our Facebook post this week, you'll know what it is. In the Gospel of Mark, there's only two places where a woman's words are recorded, written down. That's important because the Syrophoenician woman, she is the first example of that in the Gospel of Mark. And then the second is Mary at the tomb at the end. There's two examples. And you have to think in the time in which the Gospel of Mark was written, in this culture that Jesus was ministering in, it was a lot more patriarchal. It was a lot more with the deck stacked against women and them having any sort of voice in society and in their families. They weren't as respected. To think on in a culture that was imbued with that much prejudice in that sense, that these women's voices still found their way into the gospel. That says something. Their witness was so important that it blasted through societal thoughts. Powerful. And that means, I think, for me, for all of us, we need to listen to this woman and her story, to her truth. So with that, we see the Syrophoenician woman. She's come to Jesus. And just like in the song that we heard in the prelude, there's something about him and this love that he's been proclaiming. There's a hope there that maybe this person can do something. I can see God in this person. So she comes and she bows down to him. She says, Jesus, heal my daughter. She's sick. Heal her. She comes with hope, receiving God's love. And Jesus' response is everything but loving, isn't it? I mean, the Jesus that we hear in this passage is not like the Jesus that we're used to hearing. This is a grouchy Jesus who's kind of like fed up. He just wants to be left alone. And so he responds to her this very negative way. Why would I give the children's food to the dogs? Jesus is insulting this woman. And I, for one, am not going to stand up here and defend him. Because when he's saying, I'm like, Jesus, no. And so I think it's important for us to pay attention to what happens. Because after Jesus speaks to her and insults this woman, the Syrophoenician woman could have done two things. The first thing she could have done is she could have left. And who knows what would have happened. She would have been denied a chance to feel and experience God's transformative healing in her life, in the life of her daughter. The whole gospel narrative, the whole course of history could have changed this moment if she had just left. But instead, she doesn't. She stays, and she gets a little snappy with Jesus. I love it. She's like, Jesus, even the dogs in my house eat the crumbs. Power that it took for her to say that. The ability to trust in the abundant love of God that she already knew that she has received. And because of who she is, she deserves it. God has already given it to her. And here's this individual that she has felt pulled to, and she sees God's love most clearly coming through it. And yet, he has these prejudices, these cultural and social biases that have limited his understanding of what that abundant love may look like for the world. And she calls him out on it. No. She calls him in. Calls him into a deeper relationship with her, a deeper relationship with himself, calls him into a deeper relationship with the love of God that he's been preaching. In that one sentence, she's holding a mirror up to Jesus and saying, you are proclaiming God's abundant love for everyone. How are you showing that to me in this moment? Because in my life, God's love is meant for me too. Powerful. Sends chills up and down the spine. And Jesus, is given an option here. He could have done one of two things. The first thing he could have done is just ignored her. Pushed her out saying, leave me alone. And who knows what that ministry would have looked like. But he doesn't. Instead, he models something for us. Stops. Listen. Listens to the truth of her words, the truth of her experience. And he responds, go, your child has been healed. In that moment, that Syrophoenician woman speaks to Jesus just as he speaks to the deaf man right after. In her own way, she's looking to Jesus and saying, be opened. See how God's love is really abundant. God listens. Jesus listens to that. God's love in that. In him, he's healed in that moment. He's transformed. His ministry from that point on is transformed by that one act of truth-telling. So before this part of the gospel, a couple chapters back, we have the feeding of the 5,000. Y'all remember that? We talked about that about a month or so ago. Well, a couple chapters ahead of this one interaction, we have the feeding of the 4,000. It's the same message. There's thousands of people, and they need to be fed, and Jesus blesses food, and it multiplies, and it's able to feed everyone, and there's leftovers. Talking about God's love being abundant. But those groups are different. The 5,000, that was the tribes of Israel he was feeding. The feeding of the 4,000 that comes after this moment with the Syrophoenician woman were all Gentiles. Something in that moment, by listening to that truth that she offers him, his ministry is opened up. It's changed. And he can more fully live into that love. Dare I say it, Jesus, for once in his life, being fully God and yet fully human, was wrong. One point in his life. What it's like to be human. And so I think for me, that's a relief, and I think that's something for us to think about and sit with, because if even Jesus in his humanity got it wrong one time, and he had to be healed, what then does that say about me, every single one of us? I think that means that we have to be open to being healed. So my question for you this morning is this. Who is the Syrophoenician woman in your life right? Who is the person that makes you kind of uncomfortable, that might be annoying and pestering you? Who is the person that is challenging you and naming something for you, offering a truth of her story, their story? Who is the Syrophoenician woman in your life? Are you listening? So for me, I think there's a lot of Syrophoenician women that happen in our lives. But for me, the ones that speak out most clearly to me when I listened to this passage was a few years ago, I went on a pilgrimage to Ferguson, Missouri. It was a year after Michael Brown was shot and killed. And it was a pilgrimage that the National Church Office put together after Michael Curry was brought in. and elected. And so I was really excited to go. I was younger than I am now, and I was full of this pride and this arrogance. You know, I had just gone to seminary. I was like, I've got this whole faith thing figured out. I got the love of God on my shoulder. I'm good. I'm going to go and bring some love to Ferguson. I'm going to work all this, race stuff out, and it's just going to be perfect. Boy, was I wrong. Because I went, and we spent 3 days there, and it was a lot of learning and relationship building. And the final night we were there, there were 30 of us. We were gathered together with the bishop from the Diocese of Missouri. And to this day, I cannot remember what it is that he said. But he said something, and it just kind of washed over all of the white people in the room. But every single person of color was like, did he really just say that? And there was this one gentleman who stood up, Native American, and he was just angry to the point where he was in tears, and he looked around the room at every single one of us, and he said, white people in this room, my brothers and sisters, why didn't you say anything? Why do you sit here in silence when he is sitting here silencing our truth? Boy, I lived into my pride at that moment, because in that space, I spoke up. I turned to him and I was like, I'm sorry. I did not realize that what was being said was offensive. I did not realize what was happening. And for every single white person in here, I apologize for us and our silence. And his response to me was just beautiful. He was sharing that truth with me. He said, I don't need you to apologize. I need you to listen and then be changed by what we are telling you. I need you to listen. And again, my arrogance and fullness, thinking that I had it all figured out, and I was, the new person on the block. I said, yeah, I hear you, but yet I feel like I still need to apologize to you. And this other woman on the trip, she and I are actually we got to be really close on this pilgrimage. She spoke up to me, an African-American woman. She said, Grant, do you hear what you just did? He told you a truth. He said he needs you to listen, and what did you do but overtalk him? Put what you needed on top of his own needs in that moment. You silenced him. And that hurt. That was like a barb going right into my heart. And for me, that was such a hard thing, because I truly believe in God's love. And whenever I feel like I've hurt someone, that is a pain for me too. And as hard as that was, as much as I didn't understand what was going on, something changed. In that moment, when I heard the truth by those two people, I stopped. I listened. And that the whole conversation with the whole group of 30 of us, it shifted that night. Changed. I listened. And I'm still to this day processing the lessons and the things that I learned in that space. But this I can tell you. In that moment, hearing those truths, I was healed in a way I never thought I could be healed. In that space, my ministry changed and transformed. The abundance of God's love was revealed to me in a way I never thought was possible. I was healed in that moment because I stopped and listened to the truth of people around me, the truth of how God was present in their lives. So again, I ask, who is the Syrophoenician woman in your right? Are you listening to her? Because the truth of it, friends, is that if we truly want God's abundant love to be in this world, if we truly want it revealed, if we truly want it experienced, if we want the joy and love of God to be abundant and experienced like Buttermilk Biscuits are in our country, to be able to share that joy as easily and effortlessly as we do that, requires us to listen to the Syrophoenician women in our lives. It requires us to stop, hear the truth that's calling us into God's presence. So again, who is the Syrophoenician woman in your life? How are you being called into God's love? Are you listening? Listen to